When I built this game-changing cyclonic dust extractor back in February at the start of my wardrobe build, there was a question mark over whether it would collapse. I was convinced it wouldn't, but then on the 31st of March, when I was using it on a balmy, hot afternoon outside my workshop tent, disaster struck, as so many of you predicted. It recovered and hasn't collapsed since, but given how vital this cyclonic extractor is to my DIY projects, I've decided to make sure it never happens again. And so in today's video, we're going to do a substantial upgrade, and I'll be telling you what I think is the most foolproof way of preventing your Cyclone barrel from collapsing. So as you saw from that clip a minute ago, the collapse happened when the Cyclone was connected to this, my random orbit sander. And whilst I remain convinced that the heat of the day softened the plastic and made it vulnerable to imploding, and although it was used so intensively for my wardrobe door routing last week that it's this full now, creating a blockage scenario like this shows you just how close it still is to imploding. So I've clearly got to do something about it if I want to use this barrel again. Option number one, and something that I know a lot of you have done, is to insert some sort of plywood brace inside the barrel itself. And you can see a good example of one of these on Badger Workshop's YouTube channel. I see a bit of a flaw with this option, partly because it's quite hard to create in the first place, and secondly, you're creating a bit of an obstruction in the barrel, which is going to make it a little bit harder to empty. Not big issues in themselves, but I think big enough for me not to have to cover it in today's video. Option 2 is to insert some sort of pressure relief valve, which triggers and opens a barrel whenever it starts to implode. But in the same way that these cyclonic dust extractors are very much a DIY creation, you have to make them yourself because there are very few off-the-shelf versions available. There is admittedly this one, which was actually out of stock when I built mine. The same applied to pressure release valves. I scoured the internet and really struggled to find one because most of you out there have very enterprisingly made your own. And call me lazy, but I couldn't be bothered to assemble the components together to do this myself. But I did eventually make some progress on this. Firstly, this plumbing relief valve I found, lovely design, but I suspect the diameter will be too narrow and also the spring too strong to trigger the valve before the barrel implodes. And although I hunted around, I couldn't find a weaker spring in the right diameter. But I eventually found this inexpensive anti-crush valve on the French Dust Commander website, which, remarkably considering Brexit, arrived a few days after ordering. And even better news, since I bought the valve, it's now available on Amazon. The instructions for installing the Dust Commander valve couldn't be more simple. The only problem is I stupidly hadn't read them until today and only had a 25 rather than 28mm hole saw bit, which ended up being quite important given the pressure relief face piece needs to be inserted into the lid. However, luckily I had this clever drill bit that came with a Makita set I've had for years, and so I carefully widened the hole to 28mm. Sanded down the edges and achieved a pretty good fit. I was going to make it airtight with some silicone around the edge of this, but to be honest with you, it's such a tight fit. Note the chamfered nature of the design. I don't think it's going to need it, so I'm just going to install it as it is, because also without the silicone it'll be easier to remove if I need to replace the barrel for any reason. It's a clever little design this. It's obviously 3D printed. When you're fitting yours, if you've already fitted your Cyclone, I've got 1mm to spare. I should have gone a little bit further this way. Possibly the damage was done when I made the hole wider, but I've got away with it because that fits perfectly. And then it was just a question of marking the screw holes with a bradawl, piloting the holes, screwing the pressure relief inserts in place, followed by the M4 screw, closing valve, rubber gasket, stainless steel spring, and they handily give you 2 of these so you can get the pressure just right, washer and nut, which comes with a nylon insert to prevent it unscrewing. With the pressure relief valve in place, it was just a question of closing the barrel, reconnecting the 2 hoses and switching on. And with no adjustment, the valve was already working brilliantly. And no matter how long I blocked the hose, the barrel shows almost no signs of pressure. I would say that if this barrel hadn't previously imploded, it would be showing none at all. So that's how to protect your plastic drums from imploding. And the third option I'm going to show you today is blindingly obvious now, but certainly wasn't when I started putting my original video and the construction of the original Cyclone together. Yes, of course, it's to go with a metal drum, because with this metal drum, there's obviously no danger of it imploding, with or without the relief valve. At 27 litres, this is slightly smaller than the 30-litre drum that I got from Amazon, and at £27, it's slightly more expensive than this £20 drum. I picked this up from Big Doug, who kindly sent me this free of charge when I told them that I was preparing a second upgrade video. I've also bought on Amazon another one of these, partly because I didn't want to rip this one apart. Now, there are obviously lots of designs of this out there, and some of them come with the rubber gasket, which I was tempted by, but I thought it'd be safest to stick with this one, just in case the connections that I spent a lot of time getting right for the original one didn't fit. So let's get on with the build. I roughly measured a centre point on the top of the drum and then set up the new 68mm HSS hole cutter I hastily bought from Amazon late last week when I realised I didn't have a hole cutter quite the right size. If you'd watched my previous video, you'll recall I cut the plastic lid on the other drum with my jigsaw. Any reservations I had about the quality of the saw were allayed when it quickly cut a neat hole in the lid of the drum. And I used my old power file and some sandpaper to sand down the sharp edges. I then marked as precisely as I could, it's actually hard to get the pen in, the bolt holes, and drilled them with a 5mm diameter HSS drill bit. I then smeared some old Sikka-Seal silicone around the lid to provide an airtight seal and bolted the Cyclone into place using the bolts that came with the Cyclone. Finishing off by wiping away the silicone residue. It's quite a nice touch this, because it's got a rubber seal inlaid around the rim. So that's it, I've got myself a smart new Cyclone drum, and this time I know there's no danger of it imploding. So where does that leave us? Well, I guess if you're a DIYer like me and you've been on the fence as to whether to build one of these Cyclones, do it. It's been an absolute game changer for me since you guys out there suggested right at the start of my wardrobe build I needed to get a handle on all that MDF dust I was creating. Remember how full that Cyclone drum was at the start of this video? Well, just look how clean the drum of the vacuum itself is, other than this one towel that somehow got through the Cyclone. If you've got a plastic drum like mine and you're worried about it imploding, then installing that Dust Commander pressure relief valve is a bit of a no-brainer. They haven't paid me, by the way, anything to mention them in today's video. I bought it online, as you know. However, if you haven't made the plunge yet to buy the bits for your Cyclonic Dust Extractor, I would suggest maybe getting one of these metal drums. It does away with the hassle of a pressure relief valve. Yes, it's a little bit smaller, but not noticeably so, 3 litres. And of course, there are larger drums available. And finally, this drum is so much more sturdy than the plastic one, which, if you've watched my previous video, you'll remember I had to put this stabilising stand underneath to stop it falling over. So that's it for today. I hope you found that useful. If you have, it'd be great if you could give the video the thumbs up below. Details of all the tools I've used today will be linked in the description below the video, which, don't forget, you can access on your smartphone by clicking on the little arrow and on your PC by clicking on the Show More button. And finally, if you're new to my channel, please subscribe. It will mean so much to me. You can do that by clicking on the link here, and don't forget to click the bell notification icon so you get notified of all my future uploads. That's it for today. I'll be back in a couple of weeks' time with my final wardrobe build video. Until then, see you soon.